As an automotive journalist, it's fairly easy to gauge the amount of hype around a car. You look at the engagement your posts get on social media, the amount of DMs you get about a car, or you even look at the amount of people in your own circle who are asking you about it. This is the 2022 MG ZS EV, and I've had plenty of people in my circle come and ask me about this car. What's new for 2022? Well, obviously the styling, but you've also got freshened up interiors and you've got a bigger battery, more power and more range. This is not just a facelift. Welcome to Evo India and welcome to our review of the 2022 MG ZS EV. In this video, we're going to be telling you everything you need to know about this electric car. But before we go ahead, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the Evo India channel and leave a comment down below. Do you think an electric car should be your next car? Before we get to the driving, let's talk about the styling of the MG ZS EV because it's completely different from what it was before. This is a familiar face though because you will recognize a lot of elements from the MG Aster. The headlamps, for example, are identical to what you get on the Aster. You've got these sharp LED lights in them, the sharp DRL elements. It all looks very cool and sophisticated. The big difference though is to the face and to the grille in particular. Now if you remember the older MG ZS EV, that had a grille that actually mimicked an IC engine car. This one, it doesn't even pretend to be an IC engine car. The grille is completely blanked out. It is very obviously an EV, and I think embracing that EV side of the ZS EV is a good thing. You'll also notice that it has a charging port in the grille. So you tap that there and it reveals the charging port and you can shut it once again. Now below that, you've got typical styling elements that you'd expect on an SUV. You've got a little bit of black cladding, you've got a little bit of chrome, and it all comes together to make the MG ZS EV look very cool from the front. Overall, I think the updates to the ZS EV styling are very, very welcome. I think the Aster is a very good looking car, and I think this futurized look of the Aster with the blanked out grille has an even better look, and it looks really, really nice on the ZS EV. When you come around to the side, what you will notice are new wheels. Now these are 17-inch wheels. They look very cool. They obviously look a little aerodynamically optimized in a bid to improve range, and they do lend again that futuristic stance to the ZS EV. Something else that you will notice on the side is that big massive electric badge. This is something that they did on the first car as well. It's something they've continued here. I don't see why they do it. It's so big and so in your face. And honestly, it's pretty obvious that this is an EV. And yet, you've got that massive badge over there. Apart from that, you've got roof rails on the sides. And when you go around to the rear, once again, you will notice those very similar Aster-like cues. So the tail lamps, they're very similar to the Aster. But you do have the ZS EV badging at the back. At the bottom, again, at the back, you've got some very distinct styling elements. You've got almost a diffuser-like feature, but it's not really a diffuser. And I think overall, the ZS EV does look very good, very smart and very sophisticated. The interiors of the MG ZS EV have been updated as well, and a lot of it has been inherited from the Aster. For example, this 10.1-inch infotainment screen, that is something that's identical to as the Aster. The layout of the dash is pretty similar as well. In the cockpit, you've got a 7-inch digital instrument cluster. That's new for 2022. The older MG ZS EV got analog dials, and this is actually a very well executed unit. You can see how much percent of the power you're using, you can see your speedo very clearly, and you can also see what's going on with the battery. You can see your range, you can see whether your regen is in a particular setting. All of that information is very clearly laid out over here. I actually really like how this digital instrument cluster has been executed. You've got a nice chunky steering wheel, good materials, and in fact, speaking of materials, that is something that's really well done all over the ZS EV. Everywhere you touch is very high quality materials. All of this in the dash is all soft touch material. The only hard plastic that I could find was here in the door cards, and this isn't really an area you touch very often. All of this is soft touch. All of this feels very high quality. The places that you put your hands all feel very high quality, and I really like that about the ZS EV. But coming back to the dash layout over here, Below the screen, you've got these three buttons. One is to control the mode, one is to control the kinetic energy recovery system, essentially regeneration and how aggressive it is, and this battery switch throws up your battery status on the screen. This rotary dial is how you select the gears. Again, a really nice tactile unit, feels very good to use. And apart from that, you've got a fair bit of equipment in here as well. So my driver's seat is electrically adjustable. I've got a 360-degree camera over here. I've got wireless phone charging. You've got this massive panoramic sunroof. This screen is packed with features. You've got AI in there. You've got a ton of apps. It's connected to the internet. All of that business is here. The only difference really from the Aster to this car is that you don't get that bot over here. The Aster got that AI bot which spoke to you and looked around and interacted with you. That's missing from the ZS EV. But apart from that, this is a really nice cabin to be in. It's a nice commanding seating position. You've got a good amount of comfort and features around you. The seats are very nicely done. And overall, it's a very pleasant cabin to be in. Coming to the back seat, again, you've got a very comfortable space over here. You've got a good amount of knee room. I've got a reasonable amount of space here. I've got just about adequate headroom. This is eaten up a little bit by the panoramic sunroof, but otherwise it's a comfortable space. I've got a good amount of support from the seats. I feel like the floor is a little high and therefore my knees are pointing slightly upwards. That's likely due to the fact that the batteries are in the floor. But the good thing about that is you've got a completely flat floor. There's barely any hump in the floor over here. So 3 people abreast, their feet should be okay. Will 3 people fit abreast though? This isn't a very wide car. It does feel a little bit narrow from the inside. In fact, a Nexon EV is actually wider than this. So the shoulder room might be limited for 3 abreast, and that's something you're going to have to look into. Apart from that, you've got pretty much everything you'd want over here. You've got an armrest, you've got cup holders. For the middle passenger, you've got an adjustable headrest. The panoramic sunroof rises all the way behind your head, so it really gives you a nice view and you've got a good sense of space in here. Below over here you've got AC vents, though you have zero control over them, so you cannot control the fan speed, you cannot control the temperature, nothing. And you've got USB slots for charging, so you've got an USB A and a USB Type C, which gives you a bit of versatility with your cables. That aside, the back seat is actually a very comfortable space to be. The only criticism I really have of it is the fact that my knees are pointing a little upwards because the floor is too high. But apart from that, nothing at all. Now let's talk about the driving, and the ZS EV has always been one of the nicer EVs to drive, especially in this entry-level space, not talking about the exorbitant luxury EVs. What's new on the ZS for 2022? Well, the most obvious is the bigger battery. So instead of a 44.5 kilowatt hour battery, you now get a 50.3 kilowatt hour battery. That's a marginal increase in the size of the battery, and what you get with that is also a marginal increase in range. So earlier the claimed range was around 419 kilometers. Now you get about 45 kilometers more than that. So you get something around 460 something kilometers. That's the claimed range though, mind you. And in the real world, you also get an improvement in range, but I think the real world improvement's around 30 to 35 kilometers, which means that in the real world, in normal driving conditions, in normal mode, you should be able to do around 320, 330 kilometers in real world driving conditions, mind you. And that is seriously impressive. 330 kilometers does give you the liberty to actually take short intercity road trips. It gives you the liberty to not charge it twice a week. You can charge it even less frequently than that. And that adds a lot of usability to your electric car. And I know 30 kilometers might seem like nothing in the bigger picture. 30 kilometers of 300 kilometers is nothing, but it's actually 10%, and 10% is a lot. And those 30 kilometers can actually be the difference between you reaching a charging station a few kilometers away or you running out of charge and having to tow your EV to the closest charging station. So the 30 kilometers I'm sure will be an improvement to many. It'll also keep range anxiety at bay. Instead of say 100 kilometers of range when you're running out, you'll have 130, and that range anxiety will also be marginally reduced with this marginal increase in range. So overall, full thumbs up for getting more range on the ZS EV. It already had a decent amount of range. This just adds to that. The second thing that the ZS EV has improved is its power outputs. Now it makes 173 0.5 bhp, and that's a significant improvement over what it used to be. And what that means is you get better drive and better acceleration. The torque, that instant torque, has always been there and that hasn't changed. But now as speeds rise, you still have a good amount of power on tap. Acceleration is good. Off the line, it's not as violent as I expected. It does gently ease into it before it's rolling, before it really gives you the full brunt of the power that it has. And in that sense, it doesn't give you that full electric car feel where it shoves you into the back of your seat. But where it does do that is when you're doing 40-50 kilometers an hour and you step on it, it really moves at those speeds. Now, at 50 kilometers an hour, you step on it, that roll on acceleration, that little burst of power that you would need to overtake something on the road, overtake something on the highway, that is very, very strong. And that actually makes the ZS EV incredibly easy to drive, because suppose there's even a fast moving car in front of you, overtaking it is a breeze. You just have to stamp on the throttle and you know that all that energy is being channeled to the front wheels and it is moving you forward rapidly. Now, something else that the MG ZS EV gets is adjustable drive modes and adjustable curves. So the drive modes are obvious. You've got Eco, Normal and Sport, and what they essentially do is change the way the car accelerates and the way you have access to power. In Eco mode, it's fairly dull. Normal mode is a lot more sprightly. Sport mode is actually pretty quick and you can actually get a lot out of the car in Sport mode. Though I honestly feel driving it in normal mode is reasonable. You can do 99% of all your driving in normal mode. Sport mode is just an added fun factor, I would say, that allows you to get a lot more out of the car and the electric drivetrain. Now, the other thing that the modes control are the range. So when you put it into Eco mode, your range actually on the display, it goes up, whereas if you put it in Sport mode, it tanks. So it shows you a live display of range depending on what mode you're in, which is helpful because should you be trying to extend your range, you can just put it into Eco and see how much more you're getting. And in that sense, it keeps you aware of what's going on with the battery and you're never out of loop. You're never gonna put it into Sport mode and not expect the range to change, or put it into Sport mode and drive it around like a lunatic and then be surprised by how much range is left actually. So in that sense, the car communicates and gives you that feedback very clearly. The second thing that you have to adjust here is the curves. Now, this is the kinetic energy recovery system. Sounds very Formula One like, but what it essentially does is brake regeneration, right? It is essentially regenerating energy to the battery under deceleration. There's three modes, 1, 2 and 3. One is the least intrusive. So suppose you're accelerating and you're in 1 and you let off the throttle, you pretty much just coast. There's a very gradual slowing down of speed. 3 is more aggressive, so you put it into 3, and over here when you accelerate, you get off the throttle and there's a more significant slowing down of speed. There's also a more significant recovery of energy. So it depends on what you're comfortable with. Some people might find 3 a little too uncomfortable because it can just slow you down a little more than you're used to. But I honestly feel 3 is fine. It sort of mimics engine braking in a regular car. And if you train yourself to drive accounting for the regeneration, you actually become a very efficient driver because you learn to anticipate, you learn to judge traffic, and then instead of using the brakes, you just let off the throttle and allow the car to decelerate and recover energy. So there's no real energy wasted through the braking, but instead all of it is recuperated, or as much of it as can be is recuperated into the battery, and that makes you a better driver. It allows you to extend your range, and it just has a whole lot of good things when you drive like that. Now let's talk about the other aspects of the MG ZS EV. I think one of its other big highlights, and this remains true from the older car as well, is its ride quality. Over bad roads, it is really well composed. It's phenomenally well composed over speed breakers, over broken patches. It feels like you'd want an SUV to feel. It does not feel like a hatchback on stilts. It does not feel like it's a small car that's been jacked up and raised and does not have that robustness in its build to deal with bad roads. It feels really robust. It does not allow too much suspension noise into the cabin. It's very well composed in that it doesn't get unsettled too easily, so it soaks up everything that's thrown at it very well, and That way the ride quality is a definite highlight, and that ride quality adds to the comfort of the cabin. The cabin, as I showed you earlier, is already a very comfortable space. It's already a very luxurious feeling space, and when you've got ride that's cosseting, that isn't intrusive into the cabin, that doesn't, you can't hear too much of it, and that's very important in these EVs because there's really no engine sound to drown out smaller noises and squeaks and rattles from the suspension. There's none of that here, and that lack of noise, that immense composure from the suspension makes the ZS EV a really nice car to drive around in. It's comfortable. It's exactly what you'd want from an EV. It's quiet, it's comfortable, deals with bad roads, and is really, really well sorted in that way. In terms of handling, the ZS EV is actually a fairly predictable car. You see, the weight is all low down on the floor, and so it is actually fairly nimble in the corners. It wants to change direction rather easily. The steering also is nicely weighted, and it does give you a good sense of what's going on at the front end. So you can chuck this car into a corner and expect it to grip, but it is a heavy car, so it does understeer a little bit. And what its biggest chink in its armor is the fact that it has so much torque steer, right? There's so much torque going through the front wheels that when you're exiting a corner and you're on the gas, it's just traction control kicking in, and nothing else. Because the tires are already loaded up laterally, and then when you try to accelerate through them, it just can't deal with it. So in terms of a handler, it's predictable, and it will take a set of corners well if you're driving gently. But if you start getting aggressive and trying to accelerate hard out of corners, that it just does not enjoy too much. It just starts getting too aggressive with the traction control, and honestly I haven't figured out how to turn the traction control off either. So you just have to live with it and deal with that traction control cutting in all the time. But that said, in terms of the handling characteristics, the way it deals with corners, it does a fairly good job. It never does anything funky, it never does anything silly, it's not out of control, the roll isn't so much that it's just uncomfortable. So in that sense, it is a very well sorted car in terms of its ride and handling. Okay, so if I have some criticisms of the MG ZS EV, I would say, for starters, the AC in this car isn't working at all. Okay, I think it's a fault with the car. I don't think it's a common problem across all ZS EVs. If it is, it's a major problem. But I think it's just a fault with the AC system in this car, and it will need to get fixed up. Not something that's nice. It's a bit uncomfortable in this heat to be driving around without the windows open, but it's okay. You got to do what you got to do. Apart from that, I wish it had ventilated seats. At this price point, it would have been nice to see ventilated seats, especially with how hot our summers are getting, how hot it is today. Ventilated seats would have been a huge, huge boon. But apart from that, honestly, there's very little to criticize on the ZS EV. It's such a well-sorted car. There's really nothing to complain about. Okay, if I buy one, the first thing I do is debadge it. That electric badge, it needs to go. That internet inside badge, that needs to go. All of that stuff needs to go. But apart from that, as a car, as a machine that moves you around, it does a very effective job. It's not emotional in any way. That's the sad part about these electrics. But then, not many compact SUVs are emotional cars in any way, right? They're mostly just utilitarian. So in that sense, the ZS EV actually ticks all the right boxes and ticks all of them very, very resolutely. Range, it's got it. Acceleration and speed, it's got it. The ride quality, it's got it. The handling is there, provided you're not going at 10/10s. Drive it at 6/10, 7/10s, and you're good. And the quality, the materials, everything feels very nice. Space on the inside is good. And there's really very little to criticize about this car. And I think I finally understand what the hype is all about. Yeah, it is a solid car. The MG ZS EV comes in two variants. The entry-level variant costs rupees 21.99 lakh. The top of the line, this particular variant costs rupees 25.88 lakhs. And honestly, that entry-level variant is a lot of value for money because you've got the same battery, the same performance, the same fundamentals without a few features, which I wouldn't actually mind sacrificing for that price point. This is a little more expensive. It is even more expensive than the Hyundai Kona EV. And in that sense, it does pinch the pocket a little more. But I'll tell you what, the MG ZS EV, out of the three, the Nexon, the Kona and the MG, it is the most sophisticated. The Nexon sits half a segment below. The Kona is a direct rival, but this update, it really makes this ZS so much more polished. It was already better than the Kona, but now it looks a lot cooler. The interiors are a lot more modern. You've got more range and it doesn't cost too much more. I think it's 50,000 to 70,000 rupees more expensive than before. So it is a really well-rounded package. It is probably the best electric car on sale today under rupees 30 lakhs.